Hi, good afternoon. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to today's conversation between Professor Eve L. Ewing and Ta-Nehisi Coates. Woohoo! Thank you for joining us for our final event of our 2024-25 season. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of nearly 400 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And then on behalf of FAN, I wish to thank the thousands of individuals from across the globe who have attended our 54 events this season, whether in person or on Zoom. Your devotion to our programs and mission is inspiring to FAN staff and board members. Thank you to the dozens of FAN sponsors and partners who collaborate with us on topics and event promotion. And a huge thank you to all who generously and joyfully fund our work year after year, ensuring that our content remains free and open to all. We are humbled by your generosity. And now for introductions. Professor Eve L. Ewing is a writer, scholar, and cultural organizer from Chicago. She is the award-winning author, most recently, of Original Sins, The Miseducation of Black and Native Children in the Construction of American Racism, and instant New York Times and USA Today bestseller. FAN hosted Eve in 2018 for her nonfiction work, Ghosts in the Schoolyard, Racism and School Closings on Chicago's South Side, an amazing event. Among other work, she has written several projects for Marvel Comics, most notably the Ironheart series and Black Panther, and is currently writing Exceptional X-Men. Eve is associate professor at the University of Chicago, and her work has been published in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times, and many other venues. Joining her is Ta-Nehisi Coates, the author of The Beautiful Struggle, We Were 8 Years in Power, The Water Dancer, The Message, and Between the World and Me, which won the National Book Award in 2015. He is the recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship. FAN had the pleasure of hosting Ta-Nehisi in 2017 for We Were 8 Years in Power and 2019 for The Water Dancer. We couldn't be more thrilled to have these two amazing humans back with FAN. Welcome, Eve Ewing and Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Hey, thanks, Lonnie.
Thank you, Lonnie. I Eve, I actually have not had a chance to talk to you about this book.
Well, it's kind of funny. I was just thinking as we were hearing the intros, is like we talked every day, but we haven't talked in public in like since the Water Dancer paperback, which I think was that 20, when was the Water Dancer paperback? 2021?
It was a while. It's been a while.
It's been a minute. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, and we haven't talked about the book, so it's all
Yeah,
good.
no, we haven't. So one of the things I just want to say, and I'm just gonna I'm gonna conduct this as if nobody's here.
Wait, I'm lying. Sorry. We did the event for your book in
We
October.
did for the message.
Okay.
The message. Yeah. But I'm gonna act like nobody else is here.
Okay, cool.
I'm just gonna talk to you. So the one moment I'm gonna not ignore the audience is to say this. It's a blessing, obviously, to have you as a friend and a sister, but as a comrade, trying to understand systems of the world that are presented to us as noble and ideal, and uncovering them as something less. In different ways, I feel like we're approaching the same thing. And so often when I read your work, as was the case with this book, things are revealed. You know what I mean? And, there's an obvious thing that I'm sure you are aware of at this point, wherein a good part of, the message is about, me trying to reconcile myself with schooling as a student. And a good part of this book is about you trying to reconcile yourself to schooling as a teacher.
Yeah, wow,
So,
yeah.
it's a real honor, as always, to talk to you about this book.
Thanks, man.
I'm not done though. I'm not done yet.
Okay.
Because the second part is this is such a of course, I'm a huge fan of Ghosts in the Schoolyard, and this is just such an expansion. You know what I mean? Some things that were present there. I mean, Ghosts in the Schoolyard, to me, like, what I remember is the physicality of what a school is and what happens when a school, disappears, and how schools become nodes of community. It is pro school in the sense of school as a resource, as a node. But this is this intellectual interrogation of what schooling as an institution is, and what it historically has been. And so, I mean, they should be read in pairs. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you. Thank you for illustrating that for me because I hadn't thought about it that way. And that's that is yeah, that's illustrative. I'm grateful for you. I mean, I try to tell you all I try to give people their flowers. So I'm grateful for you and I'm happy we get to talk.
Yeah. No, it's a real honor. I want to start just with I want to ask you something, and I don't think I've ever asked you this, but I want to ask you something quite simple. I want to ask, why did you become a teacher?
Wow, that is a great. I love a simple direct question. Um, I became a teacher, I think for in a different way. So a lot of folks that are teachers, this is gonna sound like a little, I don't mean this in like a silly way, but I've been around a lot of teachers. So a lot of teachers will tell you things like I always wanted to be a teacher. I always dreamed of being a teacher when I was a kid, I would line up all my stuffed animals and talk to them, and that was not me at all. I wanted to be, everything. I wanted to be an archaeologist. I wanted to be a paleontologist. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be, a dog walker. Like everything that kids want to be. And when I was about to graduate college, I became interested in the idea of joining the Peace Corps. And I wanted to live in West Africa. I wanted, we're both francophones. Like I wanted to live in West Africa and use my French language skills. And I had at that point, I had already been working in schools and working in different capacities and teaching for a few years. And I love kids. I always grew up, babysitting and being around kids, and I really prided myself on being like that babysitter. Like if you came home and it's like we built a puppet theater and did a puppet show and baked cookies and I like washed all your dishes. Like I just really, I love to run around and be outside. I love kids. I love children. And the funny thing is that nobody ever suggested to me that I be a teacher, even though I was working in schools in college, I was working in classrooms. And I think that's because people think about teaching as this unintellectual type of work, right? And, it was a big deal for me to go to college and kind of like people wanted me to do some sort of like elite thing. Um, and so I feel like it feels like a huge missed opportunity that I wasn't encouraged or invited to become a teacher. But anyway, so I made this plan. I was like, okay, I'm going to join the Peace Corps. And then my fourth year in college, I took a leave of absence from school for 3 months. And I went to Paris by myself and I lived there by myself. And while I was there, it became so apparent to me so immediately that I was not in a place to leave the country for 2 years. And so I started kind of reflecting. Oh, do we lose coats? Are you back? Okay, there you are. Oh, wait, you're muted, G. Hold on.
My bad. Sorry, guys. I'm here.
I was like, he's listening so intently. Um, so, it became apparent to me that I wasn't ready to live abroad, and I started crying, and I was like, why am I crying? Like, what am I grieving or what am I sad about? And I realized that what I had been looking forward to was teaching. And I thought like, well, surely people need teachers where I live. Like, surely people need teachers where I'm from. Like, surely my own community needs teachers. And so I became a Chicago public school teacher and I had attended CPS schools from kindergarten through 12th grade. So, that as a person who has like lots of formal schooling, that's still the longest tenure of my education, right? Is that 13 years I spent in CPS. So yeah, that's why I became a teacher. And what I found out was that the service so I went into the field from this idea of service and this idea of love, like loving children. I love kids. I like to have fun. I like to be around kids doing fun stuff. And what I found in the profession was all of that plus like a deep level of intellectual engagement that I think people often don't account for.
Mm,
Um, and you and I have talked about this a lot, right? But the basic premise of like trying to help a person who's at a very critical developmental stage understand something that is deeply abstract. And that
mm,
something could be like clouds, like why do we have clouds in the sky? Or like why do we have day and night? Or, what is a metaphor, right? Or like what is a
mm,
verb? But it can also be something like heartbreak. It can also be something like what does it mean to be a good friend? And I taught middle school, which like I believe that all teachers have their kind of natural lane, and whatever is outside your lane is like horrifying to you. So kindergarten teachers are like, oh, high school students, all they do is like sleep and curse and, make out with each other. And the high school teachers are like, oh, the kindergartners, all they do is like pee on themselves and sneeze in your mouth and all that type of stuff. A first grader did sneeze in my mouth once, true story. It's very gross. And so when people hear that I taught middle school, they're like, oh my God, right? Because people project their own usually horrific memories of middle school onto it. And I love middle school. Like middle school is my jam. It is a time when young people are starting to be capable of like really fascinating abstract cognition, and they're looking at things like justice and friendship and history and all these big themes of the world for the first time. You get to be on that ride with them, and at the same time they're so young, right? And they're so earnest and honest. They are very expressive about how they feel. So I love middle school, and I love the deep intellectualism of trying to like figure out like how am I going to get this kid to understand what a fraction is, right? And this my strategy for that worked on this kid, but this kid it's not working. So like what am I going to do differently? And then when you leave at the end of the day, you know like at 9 a.m. this person didn't know what a fraction is, and now they do. Like I did something, you know. There's limits to that, but that's yeah, that's why I became a teacher.
And there's a story you tell in the book about a field trip that was proposed to Cook County Jail. Do I have that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you
How
do.
far, how far into your teaching were you at that point?
That was my third year of teaching, and I was teaching an eighth grade homeroom. And so it was my first time as a homeroom teacher. And I was in the same school, but because I was a homeroom teacher, I was now brought into this plan, like, oh, every year we take this field trip to the jail. We take the eighth
Mhm.
graders to the jail. And it was yeah, it was horrible. It was a
What,
horrible.
well, I guess first of all, will you just tell the story very, very
Yeah,
quickly?
sure,
I want to get
sure.
into some things that it brings up.
Sure. So, yeah, so I'm teaching, I'm having a great year, and I'm informed that like we have this field trip coming up and it's this jail field trip. And you know, this was many years ago, and so I was not able to articulate in the way that I would be able to
Yeah.
now, like exactly why this wasn't good to me. But I was like, this is not good. Right? Like for in my view, this is not good. And it was really tough because, you know, when you're working within an institution, there's also this idea of humility, right? And so like the person who was, you know, leading this trip was a very experienced educator, somebody that I trusted a lot, somebody that I felt loved kids, right? There were other Black people involved, right, planning this. And so, but I was like, this is not good in my view. And so what I decided was I was like, okay, I'm gonna take I'm gonna plan a different field trip on the same day. And we're gonna go see like a documentary about Poetry Slam at the Gene Siskel Film Center downtown. And I said, anybody who wants to come on my field trip, if you're in my class or not, like if you want to come to my field trip, you can come if that's what your parents want you to do. And if you want to do this other trip, you can do it. Because, you know, there was something about like, I don't know, not wanting to put my own ethos or my own ideology. If somebody was like, "Yeah, I really want my kid to go to the jail," right? Like, what do I say about that? And so we had this trip, and we had the students split up. And I'll never remember one of my students came in and handed me a permission slip. She's like, "My mom said I don't need to be going to the jail." I was like, "All right." Like, I'm not about to be there. So we split up. And the day, you know, the day that it happened, you know, Chicago, you spend a lot of time here, you know, it's cold, right, in the spring. And so we had like a warm day. And like of all the school things that I'm in love with, of which there are many, the field trip day feeling is like one of my favorite feelings. Like I remember how it felt as a kid, and I remember how it felt as an adult, right? And as an adult, it's very like high energy, frenetic because I'm like, I gotta keep track. Where's the bus and what the food and the chaperone and the permission slip and all this stuff. So we're on our way back, and I'm like, I did it. Like I'm returning with the number of kids that I left with. We're gonna be on time. And we get back to my class, and half my class is gone. They're not back yet. So all the kids that went to the jail, they're not back. And I'm like, it's about to be dismissal. So like, you know, we're getting shoes, we're getting book bags, we're cleaning up, we're doing all the things we need to do. And the door opens, and all the students that had gone to the jail walked in, and it was like, you know, there's things I can't tell you what I had for breakfast yesterday. There's just those images in your life that you remember forever, and I remember them entering, and this sense of despair that kind of hung around them like a veil. You know, this is 13, 14-year-old kids. And I remember one of them walked up to me and she just put her arms around me. And I looked around and I realized like this had been a devastating experience. And one of the students that I mentioned in the book was a student that I really liked. He was really funny. We were in a book club together. Actually, I did a book club with him where me and him and some other kids were reading Kindred by Octavia Butler, and they kicked me out because I wasn't keeping up with they're like, Miss Ewing, you're behind. Like we are, you can't be in the book club no more with us. I was like, I had grading to do last night. They're like, I'm so sorry. Like we have to have some standards. So and he was that kid that everybody else was like super annoyed by, but we had a really good relationship. And he wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't talk to me. He's just packing up his stuff. Another girl is just like silently weeping. And I heard her say like, my daddy is in there. Like I don't like thinking about my daddy being in there. And now I'm about to cry. And the young boy who wouldn't talk to me, I found out much later that his father was incarcerated, is incarcerated, is serving like a 75-year sentence. And they have the same name. And so I
Mm,
I found this out because I was actually looking up like, oh, where's so and so? Where'd they go? And what comes up is his father.
mm, mm,
And so afterwards, I had this kind of debrief with the teacher who had led it, and she was just telling me all these horrible things that had happened. And the presumption was just like that this is good for them, right? Like it's good that it was scary. It's good that it was traumatic. And I think that what I would have been what I understood at the time, I didn't there's a lot of things I didn't know. What I did understand was I didn't think that jail was like an effective deterrent. Right? I was
yeah,
like whatever path these young people are on, the things that are going to determine whether they end up in that space or not, to me has very little to do with like were they adequately frightened today, you
right,
know? And I was
right,
like, I just don't think that's our job. I don't think our job is scaring kids. So yeah,
right.
that's the story.
So one of the things, like that's what was familiar about that to me was a deeply ingrained notion uh, in the wider society, but perhaps most tragically, certainly in the Black community.
Yes.
I can't necessarily speak for the Native community, which we'll talk about in a moment. But this idea of what I can only call like the efficacy of violence, in terms
Mm.
of how you educate and you get people to get things. And one of the things that became clear to me as I, grew older and I saw other kinds of schools is that that is a mode of education that is uniquely reserved for certain people.
Yes, not for
Um,
everybody.
it's not for everybody.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? And that is directly tied to where you stand on the hierarchy. But one of the beautiful things about this book is you link this to the history. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So it's not just say racism, capitalism, etc., but it is that, but it is a history of that, and it is how we have been seen, how Native people have been seen, and as you demonstrate in this story, how we see ourselves. Uh,
Yes, yes.
One of the things I would ask you to do is link why people in that classroom would think it was appropriate
Yeah.
uh, to take kids to jail as some sort of educational tool to how folks have historically seen it correct for Black people and Native people to be schooled in this country.
Yeah, man. I mean, I really appreciate you bringing in the part about how we see ourselves because, like, you and I, one of the privileges we have is we travel a lot, we talk to people a lot, right? And, like, how many times a month do you, just in conversation with a clerk, a cab driver, whatever, hear people say something like, we need to get ourselves together. Like, Black people, we need to,
We never stick together.
yeah, we don't stick together and everybody else is doing great and we're messing up like we're terrible. And yeah, that's like it's a thing. And the history of it is I think it's one of those things that like I knew, but I didn't know. And once I got into it, I was like, oh, this is wild. And I'm going to paraphrase a historian that I know has had a huge impact on you, and that's Eric Foner, right? And so one of the things that Eric Foner says is that basically like once Black people became legally emancipated in this country, he said like one of the defining problems of American society is what to do with free Black labor. And I would
Mm,
expand that
mm,
to say, like, what to do with Black people, Black people's bodies, the presence of Black people. And, we have this system where through slavery, there becomes a profound economic incentive to make as many Black people as possible, right?
mm,
The
mm,
premise of chattel slavery is that, like, which is, as we know, historically distinct from many other forms of slavery, is not just that you're enslaved, but your child and your child and your child is enslaved, right? It's a permanent, inheritable condition. And
mm,
so, we have an economic incentive to make as many bodies as possible from which you can exploit. But on the other hand, both during slavery and certainly after slavery, those bodies become a danger, right?
Mm.
Those bodies become a source of potential uprising, of resistance. And so what we see in the Reconstruction era of education is this very explicit, very direct message to Black people that the most important thing you can do is control yourself. The most important thing you can do is to be subservient, to be meek, to be mild, to be quiet. And I don't mean this in kind of an implicit, subtle way. I mean this in very explicit ways. So one of the folks that I cite at length in the book is Lydia Marie Child, who was an abolitionist who wrote a book called The Freedmen's Primer, and she wrote a number of basically textbooks for freed people, counsels to freed people. And she says in this book, she says things like, you should go back and work for your former enslavers. You should work hard. You should earn some money. And if they raise their hand against your children, if they hit your children, or if they try to sexually assault your wife or disrespect your wife, you tell them you can't do that because I'm free now, right? Whatever you do, don't get angry against them. Don't raise your hand against them, right? Don't be violent against them. And if they don't listen to you, tell them, I have rights. And if they still don't listen to you, you should write a letter to your congressperson, right? This is like real. And it's like incredible stuff, right? She talks about Toussaint Louverture and John Brown as historic figures that she wants Black people to be aware of. And she tells these kind of parables about them that are wild. She talks about Toussaint Louverture enjoying a quiet domestic life, that he was a very peaceful man. She talks about John Brown, how on his way to the gallows, he has this interaction with a young child, and it's like Jesus going to the cross. And she never talks about why he's going to the gallows, like anything about that. So it's this vision that, you better control yourself. You are inherently violent. You are
Wait,
inherently
I'm sorry. I
savage.
just want to add my favorite
Yeah.
part of that too. And if all else fails, be patient, right?
Yes, just be patient, just wait. And actually, you need to really be patient because there's still enslaved people in South America and in the Spanish colonies. And if you don't act right, they're gonna still be enslaved and it's gonna be your fault. Right? Everybody's watching you to see how Black people in the States are gonna act, right? And so this idea that like you are inherently savage, you are dangerous, you are violent, you are barbarous, and you better keep that under lock and key, which we can see a parallel both between that message coming from white folks, but also coming from Black people who still to this day feel like that is a necessary survival strategy, right? And that is like, there are many, every culture has its like ongoing debates, that never end. And I think, one for Black people generation after generation in this country is this like this notion of whether subservience can save you, right? Whether subservience is a survival strategy. And on the one hand, understanding that like, one of the earliest lessons I learned as a child is what you're supposed to do if a police officer approaches you, right? And at the same time, knowing that whatever you do, you can still die, right? So both of those things, like what do we do with those things in tandem? So yeah, I think like I know that many folks, we have a lot of educators on with us today, and I think that I invite people to think about some of the daily interactions, some of which might not be as obvious or extreme as like we're going to take a field trip to jail, but the way we ask kids to sit, the way we ask kids to walk, the way we ask them to be silent, we ask of them a level of bodily control that we would never ask of ourselves or of other adults. And so like why do we do that? And to your point, for whom do we do that? It's not everybody.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've always struggled with is the extent to which both of us are, obviously writers, and the tools that are necessary to be a professional writer, as opposed to the tools that were necessary to succeed at
Yeah.
what was supposed to be writing in school, and how different, they
Can I
are.
just say something about that? Like because we're here having this conversation, your public reckoning with that has been
Mhm.
so instructive to me and has taught me so much over the years. And your public and private reckoning with your own relationship to school, I just think is really important. And I think it's really important to challenge a lot of people's assumptions that they still have about the relationship between what we call intelligence and the very narrow set of behaviors that we demand of people to perform in schools. I think your reckoning with that is like actually deeply important for us.
I appreciate that, Eve. I really do. And, like I said, I mean, having you do this from the other side, from the perspective of a teacher, is, actually giving me some knowledge. Eve, if you ever read the message, should you read the message? Eve is actually all through that book. She's mentioned very early in that book, but she gives me, the Paulo Freire quote that I use in there, with me in Palestine. I mean, so it's been a beautiful partnership. Speaking on that, I have to be honest, and I'm always surprised at this in myself, but very early in the book, like you say, you label America as a genocidal project at its core. And there was a part of me that was like, wow, that's really bold. Is that true? And then it's like, of course it's true. And it's not, I think like one of the hard things to get is that is not a kind of a sloganeering
No, it's
rhetorical.
not a polemicist idea.
No, it's not a
fact.
polemicist.
Yeah.
It is a descriptive,
Yeah.
an accurate descriptive project. And I think one of the things you effectively do all through the book is you say, okay, you disagree with this. Let's see what the fathers of America actually said. But
Right.
let's talk about what they actually said. And I just a couple of these, Thomas Jefferson writing to John Adams in 1812, talking about, as you say, whether native people might one day join civilized life. And Jefferson says, the backward will yield and be thrown further back. These will relapse into barbarism and misery, lose numbers by war and want, and we shall be obliged to drive them with the beasts of the forest into the stony mountains. There's another one later. I mean, this is building off of another. The one genocidal quote is, the only good Indian is a dead one. And then my man says, man, that was bad, but I kind of agree with it. And says a great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. And one of the things I struggle with is because, as you said, it's so clear. It's so, I mean, and as you know, I'm coming off of, reading some other things that you and I have talked about. It's so, I have a two-part question. And the first question is, I mean, forgive my naivete, but what is the origin of this notion that, you know what I mean? I mean, it's presented, it's not really a choice, actually. I was going to say, like, there's this choice, be like me or I kill you. But to be like me is actually me killing you, too.
It's a form of death, yeah.
It's a form of death. Like, the real option is death or death, And so, like, this notion that, I meet you, you're different than me, and the only thing you can do here is die.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, when you think about like the origins of that, because to me it's like a bizarre framework. Like,
yeah.
And it's not a total, like everybody doesn't think that when they like that is not a thing across history that people always think. It's a very particular thing.
Yeah, and I think that like it's really important. So I've been to, and I think you've been to mostly, we've been to Palestine, been to South Africa, I've been to Australia, I've been to the United States, I've been to Canada, right? And so there's something interesting about these specifically settler colonial states.
Right.
And it's interesting because when you're in it, right? I saw a webcomic the other day.
Will you just define what you mean?
Yeah, I definitely will. I saw a webcomic the other day where is a scuba diver interviewing a seahorse and he's like, "So what do you think of water?" And the seahorse is like, "What's water?" Right? And so like it's not even like, "Oh yeah, it's everywhere." I know it's like, "No, literally, what are you talking about? What's water?" So I think that when you grow up in a settler colonial society, it's easy to think that this is normal and universal, and it isn't. So to talk briefly about what I mean when I say settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is the idea that you come to a land that already has people there who have been there in the case of, these lands since time immemorial as stewards of the lands. And you say, no, in fact, I am the rightful people of this land. And not as a visitor, but like I belong here. Like I am the true native of this land. This is my land. And it requires the doctrine of what's known as terra nullius, the idea of empty land, right? It requires a cognitive trick, which is to look around at a place where there are people and to say, this land is empty, right? And to say, I belong here, this is mine, through God, through religion, through whatever you have to do. And we see and to take that on as the true story, the myth of the origins of that place. And in the context of the United States, we see this everywhere with with what Jefferson enshrined in legal doctrine as what was called the basically the doctrine of discovery, but we can think of it as a doctrine of disappearance, right? The idea that once you come to a place, you get to say whatever was here before can disappear. This is mine now. I belong here. And the way we tell the story of these lands, right? Even with the notion of what, the founding of this country, it quite simply erases the idea that anything happened before. And it's really an incredible feat because it requires a fiction that needs constant maintenance. Like
Mhm.
because the fiction is, you and I are both like nerds, so think of it like spell casting, right? It's like you're draining mana, right? In order to keep this illusion going, you have to keep feeding it and feeding it. And
Mhm.
so it requires a school system that has kids, dress up as these people and say like, here's the story, here's what happened with like construction paper pilgrim hats, right? It requires the idea of us referring to these folks as the founding fathers. It requires essentially a new creation myth, right? All cultures have their creation myths about where people came from a star, from a turtle, from the ocean, from the sun, right? And the United States has its own creation myth that it's a story that we invented that starts the narrative of everything that matters at a very specific point in time, as though nothing occurred before and there was no one here before. And that's what settler colonialism does, but it requires that constant maintenance, and the maintenance is ideological. And so, when we think about a genocidal project in the United States, that means literally like with guns, right? Forcing Native people from their lands. It means fighting them on the battlefields. It means containment. It means starvation. It also means a battle of the spirit, right? It means kidnapping their children. It means telling those children that they cannot speak the language that they grew up, right? It means telling those children that they're bad, telling them that they're savages, cutting their hair, abusing them, taking them as far away from their parents as possible, right? But it also means a set of ideological violences that recur over and over. And so, think about like Christopher Columbus, right? And the idea that he's a hero, the idea that he should have a day dedicated to him, the idea that he's the most important Italian that ever lived when like Italy as a nation state didn't really exist at the time that he was, right? Like all of it requires work. It requires constant work and maintenance in a way that I think we really take for granted. And then once you start seeing it, you're like, this is wild, actually.
Eve, what happens if that work is interrupted?
You tell me. I saw you on CBS Morning News, and I mean, yeah, people. I mean, people don't like it.
I guess maybe I should make that a more foundational. What happens? How? Because what I would extrapolate from what you just said is that when that work is interrupted, it actually endangers the project, right?
yeah, it does, right? And
How?
so
How though? Like
yeah,
how?
so it endangers the project because the theft is ongoing, right? And so the theft is there are any number of metaphors that, I'll pull on an easy one, right? So like if you steal my car and I'm like, "Dang, you stole my car." And you're like, "Yeah, I did. It's so sad that that happened." Right? It's really so sad. It's so sad that Eve doesn't have a car, right? It's sad that Eve's gone. And I'm like, "No, I'm actually right here and I still would like my car," right? And then you're just driving it around and you're driving it around for days and weeks and months and years. Like at no point does it become your car, right? And so and my presence is a problem. And so the interruption happens in different ways. It happens when indigenous people say like, "Hey, this is stolen land," right? But it also happens through their presence because one of the things that this mythology, this creation myth needs of them is to be gone. Because then you can say that the story is complete, right? And so people like Jefferson, they would sometimes say like, "Oh my gosh, it's such a tragedy. Like it's such a tragedy that the Indian has to disappear from these lands. It's so sad, right?" But it was very important to them to frame the disappearance as inevitable. And so I hear this all the time. Like one of the things that gets me is when very well-meaning, very liberal people with good intentions say things like, "Yeah, it's so sad that we killed all the native people." It's like, no, we didn't. Like there are native people. There are native people. They are alive. And you have to continue to contend with native presence. You have to continue to contend with native sovereignty. And so the interruption is dangerous because it fundamentally undermines the legitimacy of the United States as a project, and it says like this is not this is not a closed case, right? You're still driving my car, and so what are we gonna do with that? And that is that like really freaks people out. And I think what's interesting to me about it is that sometimes I notice that people of color that are not indigenous are like, well, this is sad, but what are we gonna do? Like, just give all the land back and like just, and I'm like, y'all, like right now you live under the control of a US government that also like harms you, like doesn't serve you, right? Like, and so, if you wrote your taxes every day and it went to, the Lakota Nation, or it went to the Navajo Nation, right? Or it went to the Seminole Nation, or the Haudenosaunee, like instead of the US government, like, what if we just started with that as a thought experiment? In what ways would that actually be cataclysmic to your life? Now, I think it's important when we talk about sovereignty, and we can talk more about that, that it's about more than just the mere transfer of land ownership under a kind of Western European rubric of property. But yeah, I think like the interruption is scary because the crime is an ongoing crime. And so it's not just about like penance or reparation. And I think in that way it's different from slavery, right? In that like we can talk about the many many afterlives of slavery, the many many harms that have been enacted upon Black people, and the ways in which the crimes of slavery have never been atoned for, but at the same time we can say that like there was an Emancipation Proclamation, right? Whereas like the theft, every moment, like it's happening now, it's happening now, it's happening now, and with that land theft it is also implicitly a genocidal project at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you just said that really caught me, caught me up is this idea that it requires that the existence of essentially the existence of the people themselves interrupts
Yes.
the project or the narrative. And I would be remiss if I did not ask you how, knowing that and how having written this book, how you're reflecting on Gaza right now.
Yeah, I mean, um I'll start by saying, and I know that, this video is gonna live on aside from the moment in which we find ourselves, but like, no, nothing I can say, nothing I can describe, nothing I can conjure will ever be sufficient for the lived horror of what is unfolding before our eyes right now, right? Like, no, we can call on all the great poets and all the great artists and the photographers and the journalists and the folks that are literally risking their lives to tell us the story right now from the ground. And nothing will be tantamount to the suffering and the pain that we are watching unfold. Now, that being said, as writers, as speakers, it's our job to try, right? And when we were in Ramallah. I don't remember if you weren't here with me at this day. I think maybe the first night that I was in Ramallah. Um, I spoke with a Palestinian young woman who had just returned to, she was Palestinian, but she'd been living in Canada for like years, like basically her entire like adolescence and adult life. And she was just returning to the West Bank. And so she'd been living in this other settler colonial state, right? And in many ways through her education, like she'd received a Canadian education, right? And had spent a lot of time thinking about the relationship between the Canadian government and First Nations people. And she came back and she looked at me and she was like, I realized like if you ever wondered what it was like, if you wanted to see the Wild West, like if you wanted to see the Indian Wars, if you ever wondered what it was like in the 19th century in the United States, like this is it, right? This is it. The kind of open, brazen, um, contemptuous, murderous intention that is unrelenting. And I think that what is different about it is that there is the timing is such that like there are people all over the world who remain deeply invested in a settler colonial state project that they themselves like often don't even really benefit from in ways that are bizarre to me. And it's because it's so to look at what is happening in Gaza is so damning to any shred of humanity that you might have dwelling within you. And it is also essentially damning to the state project of the United States and of Canada and of right, of all these other places. And I have to think that that is part of why it is so deeply discomforting for some people, right? Because the demand for Palestinian life, the demand for Palestinian resilience, for Palestinian justice, um, has such incredibly obvious and self-evident analogs to the demands of indigenous peoples all over the world. And, you know, a song that's been for, I don't know why, stuck in my head, you know, for the last few days is the like the freedom song, like whose side are you on, my people? Whose side are you on? I'm on the freedom side, right? And it's just one of those moments where you just got to decide, like, are you on the freedom side or not? But it is yeah, it's devastating. And you know, I could turn the question back to you in terms of seeing the parallels, because when you talk about like this is what they said on paper. No, I'm not just saying this like this is what they said. This is what they said. This is what they said. How do you read that? How do you see those moments of alignment?
Well, I'll tell you, again, I mean, for whatever reason, I'm always struck when a claim that people think is crazy, insane, and radical is in fact actually backed up by those people's own historical record.
Hmm.
And so when you talk about, as you did just now, about the claims of two peoples being very similar, I think it's also important to highlight that folks in the United States and folks in Israel, and I don't know why I was shocked to find this out. I guess it says something about me that I was shocked to find this out. Um, they make the parallels.
Yeah.
And they have historically made the parallels. They did, heads of state talked about it. You know what
As
I
a
mean?
success story, as a model.
As a success story.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
invoke it as a success story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, there is, Jabotinsky is, the father of Netanyahu, the intellectual godfather of Netanyahu's party right now. And he blatantly in his work, called, referred to, Palestinians, analogized them to the Aztec, to the Mayas, to the Cheyenne. I mean, he openly did it. You know what I mean? And so this is not, folks. And I guess, and I will answer your question. I think like one of the things that continues to disturb me, and maybe it's my naivete, is that something can be so obvious and that it can be so easy to make it look like this is some crazy person shouting in the middle of the
I
street.
know.
And to realize that the person who everybody is saying is crazy is more correct than the people that have all of the institutions and the
Right.
degrees and the bona
Right.
fides and everything behind them. That at its root, if you can say, oh, this person didn't say it the right way or they missed this,
Sure.
but who is more true right now?
Right.
Who is more true right now? And Gaza just highlights it. I mean, I guess, one of the, reflections, and I'm sorry to take it here. But one of the reflections I am having is there is a way in which, those of us who are in love with history, even as we read about it and know that it says things about the present right now, can, be lulled into the sense that, it's not right now, it can't be right now, things have
Right.
changed, and things have not.
No.
Things have not, because this is how it, like you like I've been watching, oh, this is how it happens. This is
Yeah.
how, people who we have invested even ourselves, faith in, you know what I mean, refuse
Yeah.
quiet as people are very loudly using weapons that we pay for
Yeah.
to wipe out another group of people. It's not, you know what I mean? Like hard to tell. It's not hard to see. And I guess, you begin, like, the chilling part of it for me is, oh, this is how you see 250 years of slavery and
Yeah.
you
Yes.
walk past it. This is how
Yes.
it's done. Like, this
Yes.
is
Yeah.
exactly how it's done.
Well, and the thing about the, you know, you've talked a lot about the complicity in terms of things like tax dollars, in terms of things like who's providing the weapons. And the other thing is like something that I was not adequately aware of until I was doing the work for this book is thinking about, the Trail of Tears is obviously one of the most, relatively well-known moments of tragedy in Indigenous history in the United States. But the thing is it's like that, so that period of removal of specifically tribal nations in the southeastern part of the United States, removal and dislocation, that it wasn't just, the image of the US soldier in uniform pointing a gun at somebody's back. Like that was happening, but there was also the willful conscription of average citizens, right, who were more than ready to come take somebody's land, more than ready to come take somebody's home, right? There's stories of things like, somebody going out hunting, right, and coming back and finding that a settler has taken their home. And that's where the parallels are. I mean, because we saw that, right? We saw homes in places where settlers had stolen people's homes. And the secret, the not secret secret is that that's not just like vigilante opportunism. The state makes the assumption they are banking on the knowledge that good citizens are going to help them do that work, right? They are banking on the knowledge that, oh, we don't have to take every single gun one by one to every single household because these folks over here that are more than ready to steal they're gonna have our back, right? And the endowment of state power, of military power, of the power of legitimized violence being transferred to the everyday average citizen is also something that we see in both of these instances. And it's really awful because it calls every single one of us into account, into saying, like, what are you doing and what are you not doing, and how do we become complicit in this theft? I also want to mention just tangentially that, like, part of what is a big question I've been asked about this book is like, once you start thinking about it, the idea that like Black history and Native history should be talking about in this interwoven, intertwined way becomes very obvious, but it's not done a lot as often as it should be. And so one of the examples of like why this is obvious is that these states, right, like states like Georgia, the Carolinas, right, like what do you think of when you think about those states, right? Like part of why indigenous peoples were being removed was so that the land could be cleared for cotton.
That's right.
Right? It could be cleared for plantation land. And if you think about even the ecological impacts of that, right? What it means to clear land, swampland, wetland, forest, right? All of these different, ecologically diverse lands that, again, had been stewarded by folks that have lived there and lived alongside the lands and the waters since time immemorial. And to say, nah, this is all cotton now, right? And so all these things that we think of as these separate issues, people who say, why should I care about what's happening in Palestine? People who say, what, climate change and environmental crisis, that has nothing to do with me because I'm trying to pay my bills, right? All of these things are actually the same thing, right? And they're different instantiations. It's important to not gloss over those differences and distinctions, but yeah, all these things are deeply, deeply intertwined in ways that our enemies understand, that our antagonists understand, and they bank on us not understanding that.
Yeah. I want to just return really quickly to like what makes people worthy of genocide and what makes
Mm,
them worthy of enslavement. And you give this really remarkable bracing and brief history of intelligence testing and how
yeah,
intelligence testing is tied to race. There's just no way of getting around it.
right.
It's quite clear both the IQ and the SAT tied to eugenesis and tied to this notion of difference in races, and yet remarkably, two of the people who you most highlight at the end of their careers look back and say, "What the fuck was this? Like, what
Right,
was
right.
my language? What was all this for?"
And like, hopefully nobody believes this, cockamamie stuff anymore. And like, no, yeah.
Right, and yet, and yet, can you? I would like you just to talk just a little bit. I know we don't have much time left, but if you would just talk a little bit about our infatuation
Mm,
with intelligence tests, our infatuation with the idea that you can, ascribe a number, that you can, use science to, figure this out. And I, frankly, as I have listened to you, talk over the course of even this conversation, I actually want, and this is a little wild, but I wonder if you even see it as tied to what, you just described, and that is feeding this machine of genocide.
mm. Oh, yeah.
maybe even feeding the machine of enslavement, also.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, this is one of those things where I could just start like yelling and waving my hands, so I'll try to keep it uncharacteristically brief. But you know, the country, and what you just said about like the need to feed the machine, the country requires these different technologies of maintenance. We can think about them that way, right? And these different origin stories. I've used the term like origin stories or myths, right? And one of those is an obsession with hyper individualism, right? We know about that. We know about the bootstrap narrative. We know about the narrative in all things in the United States that whatever happens to you is your fault, right? You did it. And that is coupled here with a kind of like technocratic obsession with measurement that we see, I'm troubled to say, like ramped up more and more and more in so many aspects of our society, right? The idea that you can ascribe a number to something and that number becomes infallible, right? That becomes objective, that becomes indisputable. And that when that happens, there's an interesting kind of like sleight of hand where once the number is there, there becomes we're very untrained in like asking how it got there or what it means or like what the math is behind the scenes, right? So I'll give you a really small example, like credit scores, right? We all understand the ways that like people's credit scores can have a huge impact on their lives. It can be incredibly debilitating, what you can do, what you can't do. But once it's there, it's like, well, that's just the number. There's nothing we can do about. But we don't talk about the ways that, like, for example, people who might be working primarily in the informal economy, if you're an immigrant person, if you're an undocumented person, right? You might be paying all of your bills on time. You might be paying your rent on time. But if you're doing it in cash, it's not going to contribute to your credit score, right? In many places, if you're a renter and you pay your rent on time, right, it's not going to contribute to your credit score. And so this idea that this thing is like, well, we just have this number and it says that you're irresponsible and it says that we can't get you no money, but it actually reflects the inputs are very specific, but we don't look at the inputs. So we can think of something similar with intelligence testing where IQ numbers, standardized testing numbers, all these things, we assign these numbers to children and then we tell them and tell ourselves that it means something, often with very little conversation about the input. And there's a colleague that I quote, Dan Koretz, who is somebody who, like, in many ways is he's a scholar of measurement and education, who's like not against standardized testing, but he says like what it's measuring is not what people are think it is measuring, right? Like all of the questions of what question gets put in, what doesn't, and whose intelligence counts, whose knowledge counts, what information counts, is something that we don't talk about. And so yeah, I think that it's something that like just bears a closer examination. And I find myself observing all the ways in which, again, like many good intentioned, well-intentioned people remain very invested in these ideas of like who is smart. I think, I'm really appreciative of the thread you drew with Ghosts in the Schoolyard, which in many ways is a book about like what is a good school. And I think one of the threads of this book is like what is intelligence, right? Like, and who gets to decide. And I'll just throw out one example before I wrap up my answer, which is that I talk about some folks in a Pueblo nation in the southwest of the United States who, they have this notion of genius and they have this notion of giftedness that culturally requires communal benefit, right? And so they say, like, in order to be a genius, our definition of what a genius is, a definition of what a gifted person is that you use your gifts in service of the community, which would categorically exclude people like, people, I won't name any names because then they'll come for it, but like, people like Steve Jobs, right? Like if you're the kind of mythical, the genius who does all these great things for the world, but you're like super horrible and mean to people, right? You don't get to be called a genius. And in Western culture and US culture, we're told that this is a compromise that we have to make. Like some people are really smart and abusive, but like what do we expect, right? And what if we say no, no, like how we understand intelligence includes the way we treat people and the impact that our actions have on others. So these are all subjective things that we've taken to be highly objective, and they're just not.
Yeah. I think Lonnie's about to join us, but Lonnie, if I could just ask one last question
course.
for you, and that is, okay, so this is your second book on education.
Yeah.
We started this conversation, asking uh, like why you became a teacher. I wonder now how you actually reflect
Mm,
time as a teacher now that you've done, these constructions,
yeah.
of the very system that you were a part of.
That's like a question I ask myself every day. And I ask myself that as I'm an educator now of mostly of of college students and PhD students and master students, but I still work with a lot of high school students and youth. And I think one of the places I end the book is with the contention of the idea of school abolition, which is an idea that came to me through my good friend and colleague Dave Stovall. And, he argues that schooling as a project is irredeemable, right?
Mhm.
And that trying to reform it and tweak around the edges is as effective as trying to reform prisons or policing, which is to say not very effective. And so that's something that is like an open question for me. And as you know, one of the nice things about having a book is it's not the end point of your learning, it's a catalyst for continued conversations that you get to have with other people. And so every single day I feel differently about the promises and perils of school. But what I love about conversations like this is, it gets me a little closer to something new. So ask me again in 5 years if I still, maybe my final educational book will be called like, All Schools Are Terrible and by Eve. But I'm not quite there yet. My next book is gonna be a book of children's poems. So I'm gonna go into a happier happier place for a little bit.
Beautiful.
Thanks both of you for a great conversation, Ta-Nehisi. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ta-Nehisi. I love you, man. I appreciate you, bro.
You too.
It's always a pleasure to welcome you, Eve. I want to remind folks, Eve is going to spend another hour with us from 1:05 Central to 2 o'clock Central, 55 more minutes. You can come ask her about her book specific things. There's a ton of CPS educators here. There's a lot of folks from Northwestern, UC.
You can ask me about anything.
So you can, well, now careful. You don't want to say that
Yeah.
out
I
loud.
do, I do. I mean like bread and comics and dogs and
There you go.
biking
Okay,
and
yes. Okay, thank you
yeah,
very much. I was gonna say,
yeah.
careful.
Ask me anything.
Maybe some bumpers around that. Ask me anything. Um, what was I gonna say? So how do you get to do that? Come make a donation to FAN. Any dollar amount, whatever's meaningful to you is fine by us. Make a donation, come hang out, come ask more questions. Our last event of the year. What a great way to run out at this point. Thank you, Ta-Nehisi. It's been a pleasure as always to welcome you back to FAN. Hope to see you again soon. Thanks everybody for joining us. It's been a great season, 54 events. We'll
Wow.
resume in the fall in September. We have a summer hiatus, so everybody stay safe. Try to keep your heads together and hope to see a lot of you at After Hours in just a few minutes. So thanks everybody and have a great day.